What's up guys, Enkiri here, and today I want to talk a little bit about pin squats. Now you guys have probably noticed that in recent history, the vast majority of the squatting that I have personally been doing is actually to pins. I don't really showcase all my training anymore, but if I had to estimate, I'd say probably 70 or 80% of the squat volume that I'm doing right now, just on average, has been pin squatting variations rather than simple free squatting. And now that's in my own training. With a lot of my clients though, something I've been doing a lot recently is I will use a free squat as their primary squat variation, and then I've been using a pin squat later in the week as a secondary or adjunct squatting variation. And there's several reasons why I have been just absolutely loving to include these pin squatting variations both in my own training programs and the programs that I've been writing for other people. And I want to discuss the 3 key benefits that I think that you will get from using pin squats as opposed to free squats. But before we get to those key reasons, first we need to define exactly what I mean when I say a pin squat.
Are you tired of clothing that just doesn't keep up with your active lifestyle? Meet Barbell Apparel, the ultimate athletic clothing designed for athletes and lifters like you. Whether you're hitting the gym, crushing PRs, or simply leading an active lifestyle, Barbell Apparel has got you covered. Literally. With every stitch, Barbell Apparel is engineered to offer the perfect fit,
allowing you to move freely and comfortably during your tough workouts.
No more restricted movements or uncomfortable bunching, just pure, uninterrupted performance. And these clothes aren't just for working out. Their streetwear collection is perfect for your active lifestyle outside of the gym, too. Join the thousands of athletes who've already made the switch to Barbell Apparel and experience the difference for themselves. Unleash your potential with Barbell Apparel, clothing designed for champions.
So when I talk about pin squatting, what I mean is any squat variation that is done starting from the top of the squat, moving down through the eccentric phase until you make contact with the pins. You then allow the bar to settle on the pins for a second or two, but it has to completely deload all the weight onto the pins. And then after that, you explode back up to the top as you would in a normal squat. But all of this is actually quite distinct, in my experience, from an Anderson squat, which is something a lot of people think of when they hear the word pin squat, because Anderson squats are done off of pins. But the distinction is that they are done from the bottom up rather than the top down. So the main difference with the Anderson squat is that it lacks an eccentric phase altogether, whereas the pin squat does not. And this means that during pin squats, you do get a small bit of benefit from the stretch reflex as you do accumulate elastic energy during the negative phase. That elastic energy gets stored in the muscles and the tendons. But after settling onto the pins where you deload the weight, the majority of that benefit is actually quite small as compared to a standard free squat. So if we kind of put it on like a continuum, it would basically be Anderson squats, pin squats, free squats, if we were just looking purely at stretch reflex benefits. But again, in my opinion and in my experience, the majority of that elastic energy dissipates when you deload the bar onto the pins during a pin squat. So in reality, the primary benefit that you get from that eccentric phase with the pin squat is actually related to positioning, body positioning, and bar pass. So when you perform the eccentric phase, your body is able to find the exact proper line on the way down that it needs to produce optimal force on the way up. Right? With the Anderson squat, there is no eccentric. So there is no opportunity to find this line. You just have to kind of shoot around into the dark and hope for the best. And obviously you get better at that once you have more practice with it. But basically with the Anderson squat, what you end up getting is a lot more of that dummy strength concept that I've talked about, that brute force type of aspect. It basically just kind of turns the lift into something with the heart of a squat, but the soul of a deadlift, right? Whereas the pin squat simply retains the feel of a true squat, just kind of across the board. So hopefully that makes sense, and that gives you guys some context into exactly what I mean, exactly what I'm talking about in today's video, and when I use the term pin squat in the future. So now without further ado, let's jump into the 3 key benefits that pin squats provide. Benefit number 1, pin squats build more brute force, more power and explosiveness out of the hole than regular squats do. They break up the eccentric-concentric chain, much like a box squat, right? Much like a box squat, a pin squat forces you to stop at the deepest position of the squat. The elastic energy from the negative phase mostly dissipates, and then you have to become much more reliant on brute force as you drive out of the hole of the squat. There's very little elastic energy or stretch reflex remaining to aid you in driving out of that most mechanically disadvantageous position of the lift. So over time, this is going to build up a greater brute force from compromised positions as compared to a standard free squat. But I just said that Anderson squats actually build the greatest brute force capacity of all of these squatting variations. So by now, some of you might be asking yourselves, well, why not just do Anderson squats then and just forego the pin squats altogether, right? Since there is no negative phase at all during an Anderson squat, it's true. I believe this assertion is true. You do build the greatest amount of brute force or dummy strength possible with the Anderson squat. But what this means is that the Anderson squat really becomes much more of a, just kind of like an ooga booga type of movement, right? It's less precise and it is more reliant on that straight up dummy strength. There's really no other way to put it. The pin squat, however, it does retain many of these dummy strength aspects, but because you still have to work your way through that negative phase, it actually allows you to maintain better precision during the lift. It's less of a shot in the dark, and it becomes more dependent on technique and precision. And this preciseness, realistically, probably actually creates a lot better carryover into a free squat than an Anderson squat does, right? A pin squat will carry over more into a free squat than an Anderson squat. And in fact, a pin squat will carry over very, very well into a free squat. So if one of your goals is to build your free squat, then the pin squat's probably a better choice for you in terms of training carryover. But if your goal is just to get straight up freaking as dummied up as possible, as brute force as possible, then Andersons are going to work very well for that too, or better for that. And then pin squats would also have their place when working towards that goal as well. And that's why I personally do both of them now, and they've made up the vast majority of all the squat work that I've done probably in the last year. And I don't really care that much about carryover into my free squat anymore. I really just want to become a monster at this point with epic brute force capability. So really, for somebody like me, both these variations actually end up being a godsend. And on to benefit number 2. Pin squats are probably the best tool in existence for reinforcing better positioning when driving out of the hole of a squat. Last week, we talked about long femored lifters and how they respond to squatting, right? And part of what happens is that their hips will often pop up way up into the air relative to their shoulders. So they end up into more of a good morning position as they drive out of the hole of a squat. So it ends up being like their hips pop up rather than their hips and shoulders rise in unison, right? And this is an issue that I also personally have dealt with pretty much for my entire lifting career as well. And so I have found several ways to combat this over time. One of the better ways, and I've talked about this many times in the past, is to just get stronger fucking legs. So things like front squats really tend to shine in that regard with helping you hold better position as you drive out of the hole. Another option is something like an SSB, where it really isn't quite as conducive to that good morning type of squat. So your body kind of tends to avoid it just out of necessity. And then another option, the one I've most recently discovered, is stopping on pins at the bottom of your lift. So pin squats, because pin squats create a much more sink or swim type of scenario than regular free squats do in terms of being forced to maintain position. They are much less forgiving of positional aberrations than regular free squats are. It's harder to get away with falling into suboptimal positioning as you drive out of the hole of a pin squat than it is on a free squat. Another thing is, with pin squats, they give you a second to kind of gather your bearings when you settle onto the pins. You get a second to gather your bearings before you have to produce force again. And that opportunity, it really gives you a moment to hone in on kind of cueing yourself, but really focusing on how you want to begin initiating force and the positions that you want to try to maintain as you drive out of the hole of that squat. Whereas with a free squat, you just kind of bounce out of the bottom, you pop up with elastic energy, and you just kind of end up wherever you happen to end up. So a pin squat, it really gives you a much more controlled scenario, right? It's like a bomb going off versus a controlled demolition. So by now, some of you are probably asking yourselves, okay, well, why not just do box squats then, right? They basically accomplish exactly the same thing as a pin squat. You're deloading onto an object. You're breaking up the eccentric-concentric chain. This movement was popularized by Louis Simmons, and I trust him more than I trust you. But there are fundamental differences between a pin squat and a box squat, right? So first and foremost, squatting down to a box, it actually fundamentally alters the squatting pattern. You simply cannot sit down onto a box in the same way that you sit down into a free squat. This doesn't really matter when you're talking about the origins of the box squat, where it came from the ideas of geared powerlifting. So the mechanics of squatting with the multiply squat suit on are very similar to the mechanics of squatting and sitting down onto a box. But the mechanics of squatting free absolutely do not resemble at all the mechanics of squatting down onto a box. However, the mechanics of squatting down onto pins are going to be identical as the mechanics of squatting free. So because of that specificity aspect, just for one thing, most people are probably going to find that they get a lot better transfer and carryover from pin variations into free variations as opposed to from box variations into free variations. But like I said a few months ago, carryover is an overrated concept. It's not something we all need to be obsessing about all the time. So that's not the real reason. The real reason, the more important reason for including pin squats over box squats is that the pins completely deload you from the weight at the bottom of the squat, right? In a box squat, you are still under load at the bottom of the movement and your spine is being heavily compressed, right? In a pin squat, you are not under load at all, and your spine is not being sandwiched between two immovable forces. So in this case, it would be that heavy ass bar on your back, sandwiching you between the box that you have voluntarily chosen to sit on. With a pin squat, none of that is happening. The weight fully deloads onto the pins, because in a box squat, the box is underneath of you. In a pin squat, the pins are above you. So the weight fully deloads onto the pins. None of it is on the lifter anymore. That means there is less spinal stress at the bottom here, and that true deload, in my experience, it actually yields a higher SFR, higher stimulus fatigue ratio, compared to something like a box squat, but even compared to free squats. I actually find that these pin squatting variations are pretty forgiving, and I have quite a long experience of doing free squats. So again, for some people, especially for older lifters, this true deloading aspect onto the pins and the removal of the stretch reflex along with it can be something that is very important, because it can create a squat that's actually much more joint friendly, right? It's less straining on the hips and the knees and potentially even the spine, but it can still also be loaded very heavy if that is one of your goals, which is still pretty much one of my goals. So you're not sacrificing strength gains or muscle gains, but you are actually limiting joint stress. So again, that's going to become something that will become more and more important for you guys as you get older and older, if you want to keep on lifting for the long run. Now, couple all of that stuff with the more natural squatting mechanics that are present in a pin squat, and personally, I just think they are overall a much better choice for the vast majority of lifters as compared to box squats specifically. As well, and really just to hammer home my original point here, because you are truly and fully deloaded from the weight at the bottom of that pin squat, right? You are going from underload to not being underload, and then back to being underload instantaneously once again. Because of that, you have to learn how to brace maximally and instantaneously through the torso and through the core, and then drive aggressively through the legs without losing position as soon as you initiate that concentric phase. As I said earlier, many people struggle with their hips popping up as they drive out of the hole of the squat, and the pins essentially force you to learn how to fix that, right? So this tool is probably one of the best tools out there for ingraining proper drive out of the hole of a free squat. These gains are going to carry over from that pin squat into the free squat. So you get all the dead stop explosive benefits of box squats, but it comes with a higher SFR as far as you can get from a bilateral heavy squat variation, but it also simultaneously ingrains natural and optimal squatting mechanics, probably better than any other tool that I can think of. And finally, major benefit number 3, the depth of pin squats can be easily adjusted to suit any individual or any training goal, right? Now, it's really understood by now at this point in time by equipment manufacturers that having a lot of pin spacing options for the safeties on squat racks is actually a very important thing. So most racks these days, they come, at least the good ones, come with spacing options that are really about as small as can be made without sacrificing the structural integrity of the rack. So for example, my current squat rack, it actually has 28 holes for the safety pins where they can be adjusted. Whereas my old rack from about 10, 15 years ago only had 18 holes for spacing it. The hole spacing in my current squat rack is 2 inches apart, and I have rubber mats that I can set to 1 inch thick. So what that means is I can adjust my squat depth by 1 inch up or down at any point that I want along the way when I do pin squats. I can squat above parallel, I can squat to parallel, I can squat below parallel, I can squat ATG, and I can squat any permutation in between any of those things. I can do all of it in 1 inch increments if that's what I want to do. So this kind of thing makes progressive range of motion training a very viable option. It also makes it very, very easy to gradually build up your mobility in order to be capable of squatting ATG very comfortably. That is a tactic that I have used over the past year or so. As well, it also creates a target for consistency so that you know you are always achieving an identical range of motion and an identical squat depth from rep to rep. Not only does that give you the benefit of that in that moment in time, but it also allows your brain, your nervous system, all that shit to remember those motor patterns, feel those motor patterns, and ingrain them so that they become second nature. And I actually mentioned this a few weeks ago, but in my opinion, powerlifting should actually consider switching to pin squats. It's really an idea that we see in strongman competition, right? Where they only use squats sparingly, but when they do, or at least in competitions I've seen, the competitors have to touch the weight down to a designated bottom point, and if the weight does not touch that bottom point, then the rep doesn't count. In strongman, they don't really seem to care if you bounce the weight, and they don't seem to standardize the depth from athlete to athlete because that doesn't really seem to be the point that they're after. But this exact same concept could also be applied to powerlifting. So when a lifter goes to get their rack heights measured, right? If you do a powerlifting competition, you have to get the rack height measured for you to be able to unrack your squats properly and be able to unrack your bench press properly. So when a lifter goes to get their rack height measured the day before the meet, you could also simply just have them squat down with the bar on their back until that person hits whatever the depth requirement that you're going for is, and then you would record that number, and when the lifter comes out, you set the pins at that height for the lifter, right? So you record that as the lifter's depth height, right? Then on meet day, the lifter unracks the bar, they receive a start command just like they do now, or they don't, because who really cares if they have a start command or not? And then you start the lift from the top, you squat down until you get to the pins. Once the bar settles on the pins, then the lifter would receive a squat command from the head judge, just like they already get a press command in the bench press. After you get the squat command, you stand up, you wait for the rack command, and then boom, you're done with the lift. Easy fucking peasy. And this would have several major benefits. For one thing, lifter safety would be dramatically improved because everyone would now be squatting down to some sort of safety device, a pin or a strap or whatever you chose to use. Along with that, human spotters would no longer be required because of this, because now you have a safety apparatus in place. That would make the meets easier to run. It would make them much safer overall as well. You would also no longer need side judges, at least not on the squat, because now depth would no longer be something that was being measured in the blink of an eye in real time. Instead, depth would be something that was already measured the day prior to the lift ever taking place. And now it's something that would just be locked in and standardized. So anyone who follows the head judge's commands and successfully stands up with the weight has already automatically completed a good lift. So that would, by default, get rid of a lot of the idiocy of terribly high squats that you see getting passed in powerlifting, often, even world records. It would also get rid of the unfortunate thing where very good squats that are taken to depth often get red lighted. And actually, I'm pretty curious to hear what other people's opinions are on this as well. Would pin squats in powerlifting be a good idea? Or am I just a friggin' moron? Anyway, that's all I got for today, guys. I would encourage you to give these pin squats an earnest go if you haven't already. There's a lot of benefits to doing these lifts like this. I even crammed an extra benefit into each one of these categories as I was doing the video, and I could have kept going on and on if I wanted to. The benefits here are vast and myriad. But if I haven't convinced you to try out pin squats just yet, then I got to assume there's no hope for you. But these lifts are a lot of fun. They present a unique challenge that most of us probably haven't encountered yet. And the benefits that they provide more than make them a worthwhile tool to master and to make judicious usage of. Let me know what you guys think in the comments. Please remember to smash the like button before you go. Leave me a friendly comment down below. Check out EnkiriEliteFitness.com for online coaching and training programs. And keep training hard. I will catch you guys next time.